right, everybody, welcome back to the virtual set. Today I'm joined by Mike Dermont to talk about how AV crosses over into the world of healthcare. And Mike, it's probably one of the most misunderstood, misassumed verticals in the AV industry, and you, fortunately, came from healthcare into AV.
I did.
We can ask you a couple questions today. Sound good?
It sounds great.
Well, look, what sorts of outcomes is AV helping build in the world of healthcare specifically?
Well, there's a few. There's your traditional outcomes. You have your service outcomes, technical outcomes, I think, but when you're looking specifically at healthcare, I always like to look at the patient. What are you trying to accomplish for the patient? Yes, you want your patient to be healthy, but you also want to have an experience, a good experience, and it's all about that patient journey. So when I have these conversations with clients and actually other experts in the industry is, what are you looking for? And it really is, I think, that wow factor. And it's not just the patient themselves. We talk about a journey. There's other individuals involved in that journey, and that's the family. What was that experience like for them? So I think, for me, the number one metrics to look at is, what was that patient experience like?
It's interesting, Mike. Both my wife and my sister are in healthcare, and they tell me all the time about new technologies that come in. One of the things that, ironically enough, is so impactful is the nurses station. And there's so much evolution that's happening from a patient monitoring standpoint. You obviously talk about the outcome, but look, they are in the middle of monitoring all the time, and they need to have all these different sorts of data sets and all of the distribution feeds and all the video feeds in some cases in one place.
Yeah.
But they also have to do it in a way that's compliant, right? We start talking about HIPAA compliance and all sorts of different things, but what are some of those practical use cases that you're actually seeing some of these folks leverage the technology for?
Yeah, so and that's a great question. Where we're seeing it is obviously in the patient room, you're gathering that information. Let me just take a step back, though. I want to talk about HIPAA because I think that's one of the biggest hindrances for organizations such as mine to get into the healthcare industry. Because you hear HIPAA, it's the red flag, they get nervous, right? Of course there is compliance issues there. What you have to be concerned about with that, though, however, is what type of data is being transmitted, right? And is there end-to-end encryption? Once you get past that, patient integration systems, engagement systems are a great tool that nurses can use, that hospitals can use to gather information. Everything from what that patient feeling like in the room, what types of foods are they ordering. They now have the control, as if you go to a high-class hotel in Las Vegas. And I won't name names, but there's hotels you can actually grab an iPad and control that total environment. That information is very useful because hospitals are looking, again, going back to that experience, they want the patients to be happy, they want them to be, obviously, to recover, but that mental state is very important to them, and that then helps the hospital when they're going for their STARS rating, for their ranking of their hospital. So all of those things come into play, and obviously the well-being of the patient, right? Mental health is a big contributing factor to the recovery of a patient.
Mike, it's interesting because healthcare, the buying cycle in healthcare is a little bit different than maybe what a traditional AV vertical might look like. We talked about compliance, but procurement looks a little bit different. Implementation, installation, all of that stuff looks a little bit different. What are some of the biggest differences that you see in that buying cycle?
No pun intended. What I've learned over my 30 years of healthcare experience is you have to have patience when it comes to the buying process. It's a multifunctional, cross-sectional committee that's buying this equipment, and that's the same in most organizations. But when you start bringing in IT, clinical, administration, operations, security, now you have a lot of heads at the table that all have input. So understanding what each pain point is for one of those that individual or that group is very important in the buying cycle. And I think also understanding from a capital perspective, AV in general is usually part of the capital plan. It's not the capital plan. So understanding how that actually fits into the overall play of what their purchase might look like. And I also think it's important that when you're having those conversations is to be able to stand up case studies. It's really important to show what you've been able to do in other circumstances. And healthcare, as you mentioned earlier, is one of those areas that just hasn't been penetrated a lot. Fortunately, there are case studies out there. I've been involved in a few of them where you can actually stand that up and show the success we've had. So.
Mike, you and I come from big areas. We're fortunate to have some great hospitals near both of us. But the reality is so much of North America specifically is rural and doesn't have access necessarily to the same level of healthcare. But the great thing about technology is that over time it gets a little bit cheaper. So you're seeing these deployments now in more rural and more well, I guess rural is the right word, more rural applications in hospitals. How have you seen that technology empower some of that crossover there?
Well, it's definitely been evolving, right? And you look at, everyone turns to COVID. Look how COVID has changed, our industry, and it certainly has in healthcare as well. You look at the advancements we have in AV solutions, the high definition, being able to integrate that into EHRs, which is extremely important, gathering that information, and it is becoming more adaptable. One of the biggest challenges still today is on the reimbursement side for telehealth, and that's what I'm going to call telehealth, telemedicine. That's still a challenge, but I think as we continue to evolve and we continue to bring out better technologies, get past the HIPAA threshold and the cybersecurities, it'll make a big difference.
Well, I'm going to ask you this. This will be our last question. We didn't prep for this, so I'm going to catch you off guard just slightly. You get to work, obviously, in the integration side of the business. But what would you say to manufacturers who are trying to find their way into the world of healthcare, right? What are some of the considerations and best practices that you might say, hey, be sure to research this, think about this as you step into these markets?
Hey, let's have conversation. To me, that's what you need to do. It's all about transparency. The organization that I work for, I bring 30 years of healthcare experience into the AV world. I've been through on the side of hospitals, healthcare systems, life science, big pharma, insurance companies. I understand how they think. I think flowing that communication. And if they have technology that they feel is going to work, let's sit down and talk about that and let's, spitball it. It's all about partnerships. To me, I always like to say teamwork makes the dream work, whether it's internal or external.
Mike, people are going to have questions. How can they find you and reach out to you if they want to learn more?
Absolutely. They can find me at OneDiversified, so OneDiversified.com. I can also be reached at mdermont at OneDiversified.com.
Well, look, I've got to give a plug, by the way. Diversified just moved their headquarters to Dallas, which is where I'm from, proudly Texan, and I don't care who knows it. But I'll tell you what, Mike, thanks so much for your journey. And thanks
Absolutely.
So much for joining
thanks
us
for the
today.
time. Appreciate it.